thank you for being so prompt and getting back to your seats. We want to make sure to have the maximum amount of time for this very interesting panel. When we sat down to put together the program for this year, we thought you can't have a program like this in the year 2026 without talking about immigration. And so we have an illustrious panel of experts here. I'm going to start off by introducing our moderator and then let them introduce the rest. Samira Jafari is the head of standards and practices at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where she works across the newsroom and beyond to uphold the highest standards of journalism and safeguard the organization's credibility. Before joining the AJC, she spent over 16 years at CNN, most recently as deputy managing editor of CNN Investigates, where she led ambitious awards-nominated projects. She previously served as executive editor of CNN's The Row, our fact-checking experts, the editorial oversight unit, and she's a proud graduate of the UGA Grady College of Journalism, began her career with the Associated Press. Previously, she has served on the boards of the Red and Black College newspaper, as well as the Georgia First Amendment Foundation. So thank you, Samira.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Immigration reporting sits at...
the mic. Yeah. It's one of those.
Right in there, right? Good? Are we good?
Yeah.
Immigration reporting sits at the intersection of civil liberties, law enforcement authority, and profound human vulnerability. Newsrooms covering this space are balancing the public's right to know, evolving legal constraints, physical safety risks, and the potential for serious harm to our sources. Today we're going to unpack what that looks like in real time in the field, in courtrooms, and inside newsrooms. But before we begin, I'd love to have our panelists introduce themselves.
Chuck Kuck, Baxter.
Hi, I'm Giovanni Diaz of Diaz and Gaeta Law.
Nick Valencia, former longtime CNN correspondent and now founder of one of the leading new media platforms in the country, Nick Valencia News, MDN.
I really thought you guys would say more, especially.
I'm so grateful to be here with like two of the best immigration attorneys, and not arguably the best immigration attorney in Charles Kuck here in the country. So it's incredible. You guys are in for a treat.
Yeah, absolutely. This opportunity means a little bit more for me. I myself, I'm an immigrant. I was born in Iran, and I myself was an asylum seeker many years ago with my parents, and my path to citizenship took well over a decade. So to be able to have this conversation about what's happening right now with immigration and our First Amendment right to cover it is quite the privilege. So I'm grateful personally for what the folks here are doing, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation. Nick, I want to start with you and just kind of getting the reality on the ground. I know you just getting back from Minneapolis.
My fingers are just now growing back. The human body is an amazing thing. I got frostbite. One of the things that we don't talk about is think about all the images that you've seen coming out of Minnesota, and then put in your mind that it was -14, -12. It got as warm as -6 degrees. Sweet. Okay, and literally because I'm out there by myself with my phone in my hand, providing this what has become a revolutionary perspective of journalism that we've never seen before, the selfie, right? You've never seen a journalist do that before. It's this era that we're in now because I'm holding my phone and the E-tip gloves that I was wearing didn't work. You know, this is part of the personal injury that we expose ourselves to.
You're getting into it. We're not speaking in hypotheticals anymore, right? So we know journalists who have faced detention. We know journalists who have faced who have been deported or have faced deportation. Tell us what's going on in the field. Tell us you're a longtime journalist who has taken on high risk reporting. What's changed in the field in your experience, and how does covering ICE operations today compare to the other high risk assignments you've had?
Yeah, thank you so much. This isn't to be dramatic or poetic, but it really is a lot more dangerous for us out there, not just for independent journalists who are really, I think, carrying the water for the country right now, along with U.S. District Court judges. It's just a lot more dangerous even if you're legacy media. There's very much so this attitude out there among law enforcement that it is us versus them. And if you're not wearing a law enforcement badge, you are considered baseline suspicious or treated aggressively. Without going into too many details, if you guys want to go on my social media, U.S. Press Freedom Tracker determined that I was deliberately and intentionally targeted by federal immigration agents, a Border Patrol agent, and it happened on live. I was at the scene of the killing of Alex Pretty within about 15 minutes, and because of how agile I was, just using this phone, I was behind police lines. It took me an hour and a half before I saw one of those big cameras or even the local news around the area. And I say this because I used the traditional media training that I had to navigate, and knowing that agents have their own discretion. There is no greater dictatorship than a federal agent out there on the streets of America, because they get to decide whether or not they take somebody into custody and what they do. And the fact of the matter is, because local police and state police were allowing me to do my job, and including some federal agents were allowing me to do my job, but one agent in particular took his discretion to drag me into the line of fire. And thank God for the people of Minnesota who embraced my fall. It was the people there who really stood up and stepped up. Afterwards, if I'm being rigorously honest, I went up to that agent and said, look, this is the reason why people don't like you, because I identified myself with press. I'm not saying or screaming anything at you guys. I'm here to document, and you're fucking with me. You're using your discretion to literally put me in the line of fire. And that happened repeatedly over and over. And so just to land the plane on this, it is a very us versus them atmosphere out there, which makes things incredibly dangerous for journalists.
One thing you and I worked together for a long time, right? We were
Love
both at
working with
CNN for a really long time. And CNN's a really big organization and carries a lot, to be candid, a lot of clout in the field, right? You identify as CNN, it carries a certain weight. I'm not sure how much that's changed in the field right now, but what's it like being an independent journalist? Do you feel more vulnerable? Have your protocols changed for safety? Are you more at risk?
All of what you would expect, and I also feel like this is the best journalism I've ever done in my life in 20 years. Started at CNN at 22. I could not do this work if I was still at CNN. The fact is that 19 years there, I went through the evolution of where we started to get pushback from people in places you would expect, and then in more recent years, we started to get pushback from people like you in this room, who likely watch CNN and were disappointed with where it is now. That feeling out there in the public is that the institutions have been corrupted, even if the players within them have not. Because the feeling out there is very much so, los ricos apoyando a los ricos. The rich are helping each other, and we're all left to pick up the scraps here. And so that's a big difference. The difference, I think, for me, and why I feel uniquely positioned for this, is that independent media means a lot of things to people out there, and it doesn't mean the same thing to people who have traditional media training like us. Even though I'm taking a stance and no longer part of the great myth of objectivity, which I do not believe in objectivity, I think that that is something that is I think it's misleading to the public, and people have figured that out. And it doesn't mean that I'm not fair out there. I think our conversation on immigration should start at amnesty. If it is about law and order, we should be going after the employers who have created a system to allow people to work for them illegally. It's not about law and order. In this second iteration of President Trump, it's about cruelty. Notice, I still call him President Trump. I still use language which is in line with journalism standards and ethics, but I am not lying to the public about where I stand on things. And I think it's incredibly refreshing for people who are watching the news right now and realizing that I am not full of shit. And I think I always thought I was a little less full of shit than my colleagues because of where I come from. Because the last thing I'll say about this is that in journalism, there is a liberal bias, because the smarter that you are, I think the more progressive you are. The more well-read you are, the more liberal you are. Having said that, in newsrooms, the pipeline of prestigious people from pedigrees who come from backgrounds not like my own always made me feel uncomfortable. Right now, you are seeing who I really am. You are getting a flavor of exactly what journalism is today and why I am thriving.
If you had said that through standards, I might have to believe you. Thank you. Charles, I'm going to pivot to you for a little bit. Nick has laid out some of, in a very raw way, what he's experiencing in the field, and what he's getting at too is some of this issue of what's being construed as obstruction, right? what Nick has been able to do in the past as a journalist, as an observer, what's regularly been constituted as First Amendment activity is now being seen as some kind of, something volatile that law enforcement can engage with and deem to be an obstruction to their activity. Help us distinguish between documenting law enforcement activity, which journalists have long done, and conduct that might expose a reporter to arrest. Has the legal definition changed at all, or is enforcement discretion that's shifting?
Well, I think what you're really looking for here is not necessarily obstruction, because as lawyers, we know what obstruction of justice is, right? Getting in the way of the law taking effect. What we're looking for is impeding. The federal statute on impeding law enforcement activity, which means you're making it harder for them to do their job. That's the government's interpretation of that word right now. And they constantly threaten reporters and the public who are recording them with impeding. This great clip I saw yesterday of about 100 different law enforcement officers saying, quoting the actual statute, which I think is 18 USC 331 or something like that, and impeding. So what is impeding? Photographing and videoing federal law enforcement officers is not impeding. If you, however, are between them and the people that they are arresting, that might be considered to be impeding. To my knowledge, no one has been charged, actually, at least indicted, by a grand jury yet for impeding. Because it's really hard to prove something like that, because it requires some level of intent. Not just how the officer suggests that you were acting. And it's going to be really hard to prove that stuff. It doesn't mean you don't get arrested. Getting arrested is bad enough, even if charges are dismissed. And of course, we've seen multiple grand juries around the United States refuse to indict people on charges that were originally laid by ICE officers and other law enforcement.
So if a journalist is detained in the field, what's the first course of action? What do we need to know about
Call
that?
your lawyer. Call your lawyer. I would suggest that every reporter out there have a lawyer they can call. Whether that's a First Amendment lawyer or a criminal defense lawyer or in some cases an immigration lawyer. I will tell you that we get calls occasionally from other lawyers who don't know the immigration system to help them better understand how they might be able to resolve this amicably. But ultimately, it's really a question of getting to a supervisor of whoever arrested that person or that person's supervisor, or if it's in the federal system, the U.S. attorney, and finding out from the U.S. attorney what actually is going on here. I suspect that very few people today, I mean, other than what we're going to talk about Mario, I don't know any reporters that have been detained for any extensive period of time.
I mean, that's a really good pivot to Mario. Giovanni, you represent Mario Guevera, who was detained and ultimately removed after covering immigration enforcement activity. As far as you're comfortable, what can you tell us, what learnings can you tell us about that case, and what should journalists understand about the legal mechanics of that case?
Well, I mean, I think just kind of support what Chuck said. I mean, getting arrested really doesn't seem like it's a very difficult thing anymore. So, journalists unfortunately have to, and I guess Nick could talk about this a little bit more, but journalists definitely have to take into consideration that the ways that they conduct themselves, even if they haven't really changed anything that they've done in 20 plus years, the exact same behavior, let's say 2 or 3 years ago, was respected by law enforcement. Now it's not respected by law enforcement. So, I think we saw the spikes of people getting arrested, I think during the pandemic in BLM. So it's just become much more normal, much more common for journalists to get arrested. And obviously, if there may be some collateral consequences to your arrest, you have to at least consider those possibilities. And unfortunately for some people, and it's difficult, the very brief experience I've had with people in the media, to ask a media member, a member of the press, to change behavior, it's just, it's a tough thing. And I get it, you shouldn't have to. Especially if what you've been doing for so long has been okay and has been respected by law enforcement, and you've been able to navigate that world expertly and with experience, and now suddenly the same stuff that you do is putting you in jeopardy of getting arrested. So, I think Mario's situation is very, very unique. don't know the history of Mario in Georgia, Mario's been covering ICE and law enforcement for 20 plus years. Mario was given awards by law enforcement agencies. Mario hasn't, or didn't, and still hasn't changed the way that he reports law enforcement. You know, one of the interesting things is those that know Mario in the field know that he's unique in the way he conducts himself. He has this following that's incredibly loyal, and they provide him information very, very quickly. So when they provide him the information,
they still do, by the way.
They still do. And so he's at the scene sometimes when law enforcement gets there. He's always at the scene way before anybody in media ever arrives. And that's always been from, you know, what I learned later getting involved with this case is that that was always an issue that I always had, you know, with Mario's reporting. But again, Mario's First Amendment rights were always protected, and it seemed that law enforcement, at least in the past, both local and in ICE, protected that. I mean, he had dialogue with ICE. He had dialogue with ICE's public relations person and their media person. So the only real difference in Mario's situation really is kind of the rough and tumble, the really aggressive ICE enforcement that began here and really ramped up last summer. That was the only change. Mario hasn't done anything different. The only difference is that law enforcement decided to, ICE specifically, to start to act the way that they did. Well, what did that do? The community became super, super heightened and aware of what was going on. And anytime the community sensed that there was something going on around them, they assumed it was ICE. So what I think happened, without getting too deep into the weeds and the details, is that I think Mario offended or upset or impeded in what, you know, the perception was that he impeded in law enforcement, local law enforcement, because he would show up to a scene and say, hey, I hear that ICE is here. And no, it's not ICE. It was a drug interdiction unit, or it was a human trafficking unit, or it was a gang unit, and it would basically ruin or compromise that, that operation. So, you know, our position, and what I think was really clear to us, is that the only thing that's changed is the way ICE has conducted themselves. So essentially, ICE conducting themselves the way that they're conducting themselves has put local law enforcement in danger, and it really is the thing that's impeding law enforcement. But it was easier to get Mario out of the way than it was to get ICE out of the way. You know, what we saw was, you know, arrests for really, really simple charges. Those charges were dismissed very, very quickly. But by that time, he already had an ICE hold on. And the reason why he had the ICE hold, and Chuck can confirm, just about anybody who, even if that person had in the past been told that they can remain here in the United States, even in the past if that person's been granted prosecutorial discretion from ICE attorneys, even if that person has a special protected ground from deportation, like deferred action and TPS, they're getting picked up. They're not asking very many questions. If you're not a legal permanent resident or citizen, or they can't confirm it at the time, they're going to pick you up. So the fact that he was already in DeKalb County made the decision to contact ICE. The hold was placed, and now he was on ICE's radar. There's been a lot of speculation as to, you know, was he always on ICE's radar? I think anybody who's involved with the case knows that I think ICE was more than likely okay with the decision of him being picked up and shipped over to them and ultimately removed. So, you know, I'm more than welcome to answer more questions about that, but I mean, it's pretty clear that the reason that he was detained, at least to us who were involved in the case, obviously there's no smoking gun, but the reason that he was detained was because of his First Amendment protected activity, which he was covering.
You know, what's interesting about that is Mario has a long history with ICE. I mean, he would do police ride-alongs all the time. But Mario had initially come here to seek asylum in the United States because at the time El Salvador was killing journalists. And he ended up losing that case initially. I think he was actually represented by Big Law.
He was one of the pro bono, I think, partners at one of the big firms, took on that case, litigated the case in front of one of our...
honestly, almost anywhere else in the country, he'd have won that asylum case.
Yes,
anywhere
in the country. Atlanta has, you know, the lowest asylum rates in the country. And the immigration courts in general are relatively low in my opinion, but Atlanta's the worst. So he lost the case. The case was appealed to the Board of Immigration Appeals, and at the Board of Immigration Appeals, his attorney that he had at the time and the government attorney that was working with that case at the time, who later became a judge and retired, they negotiated to administratively close his case. So basically there was a decision to not continue removing him and allowing him to stay here. So the fact that his case...
And nor was there a final order. There was no final order in this case.
There was no final order at all in the case. It was basically closed or administratively closed before the final order ever came in. The idea was, and obviously I wasn't in the room, or I wasn't privy to the exact negotiations, but I think one of the reasons why he was granted that kind of prosecutorial discretion is his great behavior in this country, the fact that the work that he did, the fact that he was ethical and his kids were U.S. citizens and he was complying with everything and he was a good guy, and he had all those good equities that that used to count. In the immigration court.
By the way, that's like 15 years ago.
That was.
It was a long time ago, different president, different time.
And the idea was, in that case, it seemed like, or at least something that was considered, was the fact that he would one day be able to adjust status because his kid would eventually turn 21 and be able to petition for it, which was done. That was done. Right when his son turned 21 in April, we filed the petition. The petition was filed, and the unfortunate thing, and not to get too lost in the weeds of some of the invisible wall that we call it that's been erected, these standalone petitions, because this case was administratively closed, he had to file what's called the standalone I-130. He couldn't file it in conjunction with his green card application. Real nerdy stuff. But because of that, if you look at the normal processing times at USCIS, it's 60 months for them to adjudicate a petition that all you're doing is establishing the relationship between a father and a son. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. But if that same petition is filed in conjunction with the green card application, if you are entitled to do that procedurally, then within 11 months, you're adjudicating your green card. So, it's just kind of one of those ridiculous things.
Well, I think the key difference here for Mario is that in the past, the government would have agreed to say, you know what, release you, we'll close the case, you can do the petition for your son, and you'll be able to adjust status.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
The big difference. And the BIA basically, the government asked for something that they never asked for, in that they asked for the case to be recalendared, but they didn't ask for the case to be remanded. A case like that, every time there's an individual detained in one of the detention centers, the government themselves not only asked for the case to be recalendared, but they asked the case to be remanded back to that immigration court, so then they could fight the case and they could continue with his removal.
Right.
But no, they knew that the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is well documented, is now a political body, right?
Well, they fired all the judges appointed by anybody but President Trump. So
Yeah,
that's
it completely shifted. So now that that shifted, what they did was they basically knew that the board would kind of give them whatever decision they wanted. So instead of asking for the case to be kicked back so that we can fight his green card case, they just asked for it to be recalendared because they knew the board would just dismiss the appeal and they'd ship him away.
He stepped off a public sidewalk into a street and got equivalents of a jaywalking ticket, and then they held him for more than 80 days. And then he was extorted in prison when he was put in general population, and his family was getting calls. And then he was put in solitary confinement, and then he was promised stuff that never happened. And 80 plus days later, he's on a flight back to El Salvador. We just interviewed him again, and he believes explicitly that he was deliberately targeted. ICE coverage here has suffered because Mario Guevara is no longer here in the States. And, like Charles said, he's still beating everybody because people are still
call him a tips. And in Atlanta, in Buford Highway, the ICE is out.
And so when you remove people like that, when democracy is propped up by people like journalists who are, putting a spotlight on things, what happens to democracy?
I think
right?
what it means here, when they're targeting journalists, that means they're doing something that they're ashamed of.
And this is the biggest weapon right now, is what my peers here up here are saying. This is definitely the biggest weapon to the federal agents, is a cell phone camera. Consider this. Would we all know the name of Liam Conejo Ramos if somebody didn't get a photo of that little boy in his Spider-Man backpack and his blue beanie? Would he be out now? How many hundreds of other kids are in Dilley Detention Center right now? Juan Nicolas, a 2-month-old, was lured, according to reporting, across the border with a promise of a foster family that would take care of them, and the mother and the 2-month-old child, who were held for weeks in Dilley Detention Center, are now in Mexico. They're not even from Mexico, they're from Guatemala. You know, cruelty is the point. Money, at the end of the day, is the point. And we haven't even really talked about that. You know, I mean, I kind of mentioned it a little bit with the empresas, the company owners who are, you know, they claim plausible deniability. E-Verify is a joke. Why do people come here to work? Because there's a system set up for them to pay into your Social Security. And they don't get any of that money back. None of it. I interviewed a woman in Utah. They took her son, 2 weeks later they took the dad. When they took the dad, they say to the mom, "You're next," and they kept their promise. We interviewed her while she was in hiding in a park. She owns a house cleaning service. She paid, she says, $50,000 in taxes last year, and she asked me in Spanish why this country doesn't want her money. And a few months after we left, she was, I guess a few weeks after we left, she was taken into custody, and now she's living in Mexico. They were hunted by the cartels in Mexico and then hunted by the secret police who are targeting ethnic minorities here, because that would be the headline in any other newspaper internationally. Secret police target ethnic minorities.
Nick, I want to pull back just a second because you brought up something that I wanted to kind of dig into, just the practicality of doing some of this reporting. So you and I have dealt with in our careers a lot about protecting sources and anonymity. And in any other time, you know the bar is really, really high. And when you and I worked together, I was often the one that would give you a litany of questions.
Oh yeah.
So when Nick
Samira
wanted
was
to
the
use...
best.
yeah,
Trained by Richard Griffiths, that's
right,
why.
Right, so when Nick Valencia wanted to use, in the old days, an anonymous source, he would face a litany of questions from either me or Richard Griffiths, and we would ask him...
Paul Varian,
may he rest in peace, about proximity, credibility, documentation, corroboration. The bar was, believe it or not, even at CNN, extraordinarily high to get to use an anonymous source. And you might think anonymous sources are coming from everywhere, sources say this, sources say that, a person close to Trump's thinking, blah, blah, blah. You see that every day, but internally these conversations are extensive to even get approval from someone senior at a news organization, whether it be the AJC, CNN, New York Times, to clear someone like Nick to use an anonymous source. I find right now that the conversations that we have with your colleague, let's say Latoro Grinspan, right, who does amazing immigration reporting for the Atlanta Journal, that sometimes we're faced with, even if someone wants to speak on the record with us as an immigrant or an undocumented immigrant, that sometimes we even pause and think, is that a good idea? Are you putting yourself at risk? And you know I come from the school of anonymity is a privilege, right? Like, if you don't want to go on the record with us, that's okay, then we just won't use you for the story. We'll go on and find someone else. But I feel like now we've reached a point that we might have to, and you know we live in an era where everyone thinks we make shit up, right? So the more you use anonymity, then the public doesn't believe what you're writing anyway, what you're reporting anyway. Again, you're an independent journalist. You clearly have very passionate feelings.
Oh yeah,
about
big feelings, sorry guys.
Big feelings, about how you're connecting with your audience. You want to maintain your credibility. You don't have a Samira to sit here and bounce this off of. How do you balance that out? You just talked about speaking to someone anonymously, and then she did ultimately face deportation. So how do you balance all this out and still maintain your street cred?
I have your voice and Richard's voice and Paul's voice and all the voices of the people that have trained me to be the journalist I am today in my head when I'm out there. I don't do this alone, and I bring over that traditional standard of the fundamentals of journalism: who, what, where, when, why. I think credibility is the currency of journalism, and the battlefield used to be the airwaves, but now it's public and social engagement. And my publishers are no longer, or editors are no longer you and Richard, they're Meta and Google and YouTube, and they decide what gets amplified and what doesn't. I try to move, and I use this a lot because I'm scared of getting sued, right? The first move I made was an LLC so that they don't go after my personal money and home and all the things. I often use the term good faith, and I move in good faith, and it's a legal term because I really do feel that journalism is not a time to be neutral, but a time to be truthful, and we are a beacon of moral clarity, and I feel very, very clear about where my morals stand. you are getting about 95% of me right now, honestly, you know? Save the other 5% for my wife.
Let me add something to that, because this idea of sources. There is we have a hearing on Monday morning in front of Judge Lamb in the Middle District of Georgia on a case that will change the nature, at least, of how bonds are given in immigration court. And I have to give you just 2 minutes of backstory. Back in September, the Board of Immigration Appeals, this group that's now only staffed by Trump lawyers, issued a decision that changed 50 years of immigration law and said that if you came into the country illegally, you were not entitled to a bond. There's absolutely no legal justification for that, but they did it anyway. That led to ICE, as they arrested any undocumented immigrant, no matter how long they've been here, and said no bond. So that meant about 1,000 immigration lawyers filed 24,000 petitions for writ of habeas corpus. By the way, that's more petitions for habeas corpus that have been filed in federal courts in the previous 20 years combined. Got filed in December and January. You can imagine, if you know a federal court judge, you can imagine they all of a sudden have 500, if they're in a detention center, like Judge Lamb in the Middle District, or the judges in the Southern District, the folks in, that they get this little avalanche of habeas saying the same thing. And they start looking into it, and they say, wait a second, this is not making sense to me. So 380 federal district court judges ruled against this. 30 federal judges ruled for it. They supported it. And the Fifth Circuit came out recently and supported it in a 2-to-1 decision. There'll be a number of other circuits to come out shortly that will find differently than the Fifth Circuit. But that said, Judge Lamb was one of those that said, no, you get it. You gotta have the bond hearing. In fact, it got so bad in his office, at his desk, that he has a standing order that if you file a habeas on this particular issue, it is automatically granted. If you think about that, automatically granted. It's lawyer, it's crazy, right? But what happened, this is the key part, something happened to the immigration judges. Prior to these cases being remanded, the judges were giving bonds, reasonable bonds to people in reasonable circumstances. They would deny some, they've been mostly granted bonds. People with long-term ties to the country, children in the United States, possible relief. Starting in about January 6th, the judges stopped giving bond. They stopped. They just said, oh, you're a flight risk. Oh, your relief is speculative. Things that they never said before in these hearings. Anonymous source comes along. The source is well placed within the Department of Justice immigration section and told us specifically that they had been instructed by phone to start denying bonds for these reasons. The EOIR, this is the part where the BIA resides, is the Executive Office of Immigration Review, no longer sends memos out. They just do instructions by phone calls. This person told us that this happened January 6th. So we have now filed what we call motions to enforce, the habeas, because it took a while for this to trickle down to the rest of us. And on Monday, Judge Lamb is now sitting on about a dozen affidavits from lawyers confirming these facts that are happening. Now, we did not disclose the source of this information. But all the lawyers that have this put their names forward, said this is my declaration of what we've seen happening, what has been in the past, the way it's been forward. I don't want to reveal, if the judge says, well, who did you find this out from? I won't tell the judge. I mean, there's no way. The repercussions for this person would be enormous, life-changing. They would be 100% be fired. There's no way we're going to, he'd put me in jail. But he's not going to, because he's going to rule in our favor. But nonetheless, we have to be really careful. I'm very confident in this case. You have to be really careful with the people that do come forward, because what we've learned as the Trump administration has fired 250 immigration judges, which is weird, because they have 4 million pending cases. And they fired 250 judges. Well, clearly they don't have an intent to finish these cases, right? Who did they fire? The people that gave fair hearings. So who's left? People that haven't gotten to yet, and they're going to say, I'll just do whatever you tell me to do and keep my job. So this has become a very delicate situation, and getting that one source is life-changing for all of our clients that we're bringing cases on.
We have a duty to protect those sources as well, an ethical responsibility to do that.
You know I want to talk about Kavanaugh stuff, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So,
It's a great thing.
just to level set, so last September, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 vote,
Closer to the mic.
last September, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 vote, stated an injunction that barred ICE officers from considering certain factors when stopping and questioning suspected undocumented immigrants. And Justice Kavanaugh seemed to go out of his way to write a concurrence that race, when combined with factors like English proficiency, where people gather, and other issues, can be a factor in ICE stops. And it's fueled a level of racial profiling, and that's really taken off. And now he seems to have tried to backtrack that. In a footnote, a couple of months later, in a separate case, this part was really confusing to me. In a footnote, he declared that race and ethnicity could not be a consideration when officers make immigration stops or arrests. So for those of us who didn't go to law school, what's going on? And
This is actually really cool,
Is
actually.
it too late to stuff the genie back in the
What's
bottle?
going on is he was personally offended that these became called Kavanaugh stops. So when ICE stops somebody because, oh, you look Mexican. Oh, I heard you speaking Spanish. That's a Kavanaugh stop, because that's not supposed to be, prior to the September opinion, they would never stop somebody for that. I mean, they would, but they wouldn't do it in the volume they're doing now. And so it just, I think he really got personally offended that they called these Kavanaugh stops. So he figured, well, I'll take this random case that's not related to stops at all, and I'll put a footnote in, and they won't call it Kavanaugh stops anymore. It didn't work. They're still called Kavanaugh stops.
But it doesn't change policy in any way, doing this footnote. It
No.
doesn't, it's just a comment, it's just a comment.
He just didn't like being identified with unconstitutional activity, I guess. I don't know.
I'm so glad I caught on. You guys all have heard of Kavanaugh stops before today? Have you?
No, now you know.
Now you know.
So yeah, but after that Supreme Court decision, Samira spoke about, in a sense, it kind of emboldened and gave these officers the ability or the license to go around and question people, stop people, detain people. Traffic stops. ICE officers are now doing traffic stops. And this is not us. This is not anecdotal. This isn't us making stuff up. This is confirmed. I mean, we have the evidence of it, and we've got all the affidavits. And what they're doing now is they're going to places where people are speaking Spanish. They're stopping trucks that they look like working trucks.
The white van.
Yeah,
The white van.
The white
Right,
van with
white
the
van.
ladder on it,
Yeah.
with a bunch of paint splatters on it. They're going to places where, like train stations where they think that there's a high congregation of people that maybe speak Spanish or that might be undocumented. And they see groups of people speaking Spanish. They're legally now, I think they feel legally entitled or justified by going and asking them questions. And the way you look. So that's the big one, right? The way you look, and they can use these factors, and it's been supported by the highest law of the land. They've always been doing it, but for that to come down at such a critical time, I mean, really, really.
Well, you would think, well, you're a lawyer, just file a motion to suppress and get rid of the arrest.
Oh.
That's not how it works in immigration court. Immigration court isn't a real court. Rules of evidence don't apply. While the Constitution still exists, if these judges, not really judges, they're employees of the Department of Justice, they don't actually have suppression powers. They don't actually really have the ability to rule on constitutional issues. So yeah, you can file motions to suppress, but the sheer volume of what's going on right now is just literally overwhelming the legal system that we're involved in.
And I think we spoke briefly over the phone about, or one of the questions I think that you're going to, and I don't want to jump, but I thought it was interesting, is like what does media get wrong? I don't think media gets much wrong when it comes to this issue. And I'm so happy that media is covering this issue that's so dear to my heart, and they're covering it so bravely now. But one of the things is every time, and I mean, Chuck, you've spoken to media thousands and thousands of times, and we're still surprised. So this is more the reaction we get. I'm surprised by the reaction I get from media when media says, "How did that happen?" It's like we've been, talking to media for a long time about how the immigration system works and how dysfunctional it is, and specifically how it's structured. The fact that immigration courts are under the Department of Justice, and they're part of the administrative branch, and that we've been lobbying Washington for countless years, to try to get something passed that will make them an independent court. But it hasn't happened. But yeah, it's the system is set up, and those of us who have been working in it for a while now, we're not surprised by some of the things that are happening right now. Obviously, it's unprecedented the way that this administration is dismantling, the few protections that people had in the immigration court system. But the immigration court system is really, it's a disaster. And I think anybody that works in it, from the judges to the trial attorneys themselves, and even the people that are head of the agencies in these offices, they'll tell you the exact same thing. It's a broken system, but it's broken mostly against the respondents or the aliens, the immigrants that are caught up in the system. And the law is clearly against them. And so it's again, I'm surprised still after, we've been kind of talking for years about how this system works, that people are surprised that justice isn't served. And really, justice wasn't really ever served in immigration court before the Trump administration. They were just, the Stephen Millers and people that basically make immigration policy, they were just waiting for that opportunity to be able to completely dismantle it, and they got it.
And that's what's interesting. A lot of what the Trump administration is doing is legal. It's legal because of a law passed in 1996 called the Illegal Immigration Reform, Illegal Immigration, but Immigrant Responsibility Act, or IRA. A lot of these things were put in place in 1996, and a wave of anti-immigration fervor in Congress after we just had an amnesty in 1986. And since 1996, Congress hasn't changed anything. Think about that. We're sitting in a system that was designed 30 years ago in a very different country economically, socially, and yet this is not unfixable. What we're dealing with here today, this isn't unfixable. And what I think we're going to see shortly as primaries heat up, that there's going to be a lot more talk about trying to fix the problem instead of trying to enforce your way out of a problem. You cannot enforce your way out of immigration. They've thrown $78 billion at ICE. So ICE's budget before that was $8 billion. I mean, what would you do if your salary increased 1,000%? Right? You just spend it. Buy some warehouses in Social Circle. Buy a chicken processing plant up in Gainesville. You would just throw money at the problem, but it still can't solve the magnitude of the problem. But oddly enough, Congress could fix it. I would love to see, this is where I'd love to see some more media focus on what Congress could do and really hold Congress accountable for not addressing this.
I was just up meeting with Congress. I met with lawmakers in DC and spoke at the National Press Club. The idea that you're going to negotiate with the GOP on this is naive
Ridiculous.
at best and dumb at worst. They lose their boogeyman immediately because of what happened in 1986. You have tons of people within the GOP that point to that as a result of changing seats, House seats in places like Arizona and Texas. They don't want to give Latinos who came here illegally amnesty because they think they will one day vote against.
Which is weird, because that's how Donald Trump is president this time, because Latino men voted for him in this last election.
We struggle from a disease of individualism in this
well,
country. And
don't we
until
all?
you are impacted, I'm serious, until you're impacted by things individually, you don't care. And part of the remedy that we're seeing right now, what we just talked about in the last 90 seconds, is that the trauma isn't just towards the community like mine that's being persecuted right now. What black people in this room know all too well. That's happened to them already. What I went in part to go to Minnesota was to show my audience that Renee Good wasn't happening on every street corner, that not all of Minneapolis was impacted. I was wrong. I walked into the school at Valley View Elementary of Liam, and I saw the pain and PTSD, which I have from my reporting, immediately recognizable in the eyes of the principal and the teachers, because it's not just Latinos who are feeling the trauma. It's our friends, it's our neighbors, it's our teachers, it's those classmates of Liam who notice his empty locker and go home and ask their parents what's going on. And I choke up because this is part of what I'm struggling with. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And now my daughter kind of thinks she knows what's going on. My son thinks he knows what's going on at 5, right? But my daughter's scared now when I leave. She's scared. People now come up to me in public, especially at the school, and they say, "You be safe." And they say this in front of my daughter, and I know she's hearing this, right? The stuff that happened to me on camera was not normal. What we're seeing out there right now is not normal. And what I hope is that this man, I respected both of these men for so long because I'm in their field. What I do is inextricably linked with what they do. I just hope that you guys care as much as you do right now, next month and the month after, and you don't get distracted by what the president and his administration puts out. Because things were going pretty well in terms of media coverage and attention, and then we almost got into a war with Iran last summer, right? And then all of a sudden, no one is talking about the siege of Los Angeles anymore. It took a white lady getting killed and another man getting murdered for non-Latinos to start caring as much. It took a 5-year-old that you guys all saw for you guys to start caring. And what I hate here is I'm from Los Angeles. I know there's a greater way for a Latino to live. When I moved here to the South, part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this issue is because I've been treated like a wetback, even though I am a whitewashed, third-generation Mexican that speaks English better than I speak Spanish. And if I get treated like this, what are people who are really just crossed the border being treated like? No matter what I did or achieved, I still got treated like this. And I know you guys know, and there's people out there in this audience who have been persecuted yourselves. Please don't be the people that say, well, I have it worse. We need allies. Fear is what is driving this country, and the only thing stronger than fear is hope. And the only remedy to this right now is fellowship and getting together. Because what's happening right now, as a result of what's taking place in our country, is that you have journalists like me writing attorneys' names and phone numbers on their arms. You have families like mine making backup plans in case my wife and children need to go into hiding. Like, what? What? This is not to be dramatic or poetic either. This is what is happening. When Don Lemon was arrested, thousands of people like me were on the phone making plans about what would happen if I got arrested or detained. Because nothing is straightforward under President Trump 2.0. Nothing. Not immigration, not our rights, not our constitutional protections. We've been up here for an hour and we could talk about hours and hours more. We didn't even get into no judicial warrants being signed. People could just go into private residences.
Yeah, that's illegal.
That's so illegal. You know? Anyway, you know, there's just so much about this issue, and I really am so grateful to have been given the opportunity to speak about this.
I wish I had 3 more hours. I have 50 more questions. I would be remiss if I didn't give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. So please, if you have any, we have 9 more minutes, I think. Please come to the mic.
Mike's up here.
If you're longer than that, you have until 1:15.
And
Okay.
ask it.
Hi, I'm Meredith Hobbs, and I'm the editor for Atlanta Civic Circle. I'm wondering, this might be kind of basic, I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about Know Your Rights training in Atlanta? Is that happening in schools or just in local communities?
There are organizations that are doing Know Your Rights training. There's a cynical part of my brain that says, know your rights, be prepared. If in case you get
That's actually the better part of Know Your Rights.
I think most of our colleagues are kind of, that's at the point. If you know law enforcement is just, they're not asking for permission. And I'm speaking specifically about ICE, right? If they're just going in, they're just picking people up. There's very little you can do to avoid being picked up if they ultimately decide they're going to pick you up. So really what the Know Your Rights training should be is the contingency plan. What to do if you're detained, to have all those documents ready, to make sure you have the number for immigration attorneys that do detained work, make sure there's a power of attorney so that people understand what are you going to do with the children, who's going to pick them up from school. I mean, these are the things that people need to know. But there are organizations doing it. We publish a pamphlet that we try to disseminate in social media when we're invited by different organizations and churches.
Mm-hmm. You use the red card? We have a red card.
There's a red card. We also have, we have the red card. That's a famous one because you can see it. It's easy to see. We also just have a pamphlet. I mean, most of the organizations out there, AILA included, have published. The Latin American Association, the ACLU, they all publish these, and these are easily downloaded and they're PDFs. You can send them out. And,
so one of the reasons why it's not necessarily effective, besides shut up, right? Just shut up. You don't have to answer any questions from anybody ever, period. Is that ICE has an app on their phone. And the app takes your picture and compares it in their database. Anybody who's ever had any encounter with immigration, these include U.S. citizens, by the way, because some states have actually uploaded their data to the system. I think Georgia has shared their data with the system. They run your face through this app. And if they say, oh, undocumented, that's it. Doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter where you are, you're gone. That's how they're stopping people in cars and breaking car windows. That's their excuse for doing this kind of stuff. But when we give these presentations to churches and community groups and business owners as well, we focus on the basics, right? If you're a U.S. citizen, you do not have to carry anything with you. Okay? You don't have to answer any questions about your citizenship, ever. But if you're a resident, you're actually required by law to carry your green card with you. And it's an $80 fine, oddly enough, if you don't have your green card with you. If you are a documented immigrant, if you're on a visitor visa or a work visa, you're required to carry your passport and your I-94 card with you if you're asked. The other thing this kind of goes to, Giovanni, is the 100-mile Constitution-free zone that surrounds the United States. I don't know, some of you probably heard of this. But the Supreme Court, in an opinion 25 years ago, said that there is no need for probable cause or reasonable suspicion within 100 miles of the border of the United States, which includes the oceans, by the way. All of Florida, for example. So we tell our clients not to go to Florida. They don't need any suspicion to stop you. They can literally have immigration checkpoints. If you've ever driven in South Texas or across the Southwest, you've had checkpoints. That's why they can do that. They can stop everybody. But if you're undocumented, honestly, the best thing you can do is carry nothing with you. Certainly don't carry your Mexican passport. Yeah, there again, I'm completely undocumented. It is best to remain silent and not resist, but more than likely, you are going to get picked up.
Yeah, I mean, there's very little to do. I mean, they picked up over, what, 270 U.S. citizens at this point?
Yeah.
Since the beginning of this. So, I mean, they're picking up LPRs, legal permanent residents. So, again, really very little you can do to avoid. I mean, I think, the Fourth Amendment still applies in certain contexts, like specifically your homes, that don't, I would ignore that memo that says they can come into your house with these little fake.
They should be disbarred for writing that memo, by the way.
But I mean, there's stuff that's, hopefully there's people that are working on things like that. But,
There are.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, know your rights is a tough one, but we try to do as much as we can. There's a lot of good organizations out there that are doing it.
But it's affecting a lot of people, right? Because they don't go to church, they don't go to school. I mean, you saw it in Minneapolis, right? The schools are just empty. It's empty. I'm not going to go to school. So this has societal ramifications that know your rights doesn't really solve.
I know a family who haven't left their home in 6 months. Husband was somebody who worked, did handyman work at my mom's house. I was actually, at the raid where he got picked up. There was a raid that happened in Cypress Park near my hometown in LA, and then I went and I covered it. And Pedro went back because he needs work, and he got picked up. He escaped the first raid and got picked up in the second one. And now his wife and the kids are so worried about the mom that they won't let her leave the house. So you have these sort of underground railroad kind of things that have popped up, people delivering groceries, teachers walking students to school. It's crazy, the parallels and similarities to what we see in other points of history. And on this note, I do think this is just a moment in time. This too shall pass. Tomorrow will be another day. It takes resilience.
One quick follow-up, and thank you for your answers. What if somebody comes to your door with one of those fake ICE warrants? Should you say no? I would say no. I mean, when we've seen the video of them busting down people's doors anyway, but.
Yeah, they still might do that. I mean, they literally are emboldened by this memo that says they can bust down the door. By the way, this warrant is created by the officer. The guy who's coming in your house wrote the warrant. You can go to a judge and ask for that. He says, I think they're in there. I'm going to go in. And even if they're not there, they'll still arrest whoever is there. All right. So I think the key is just say you're not going to get in. I'm not letting you in off the door. Thank you very much. We tell people that if they're undocumented and you go to work every morning in your white van with the ladder on top, before you walk out your door in the morning, you should look around. Open the window, look out from the second story of your apartment. Is there anybody out there in a car you don't recognize?
ICE works early. They're out.
They're 5 a.m., 4 a.m.
4 a.m. they meet in the parking lot. 5 a.m. they get the plans. They're out on the road and they're parked where they need to be by 6.
They're home by 2.
And they're home by 2.
Damn.
Thank you.
Home by 2.
Thank you.
Hi, yeah, I'm attorney Giovanni, and so I just want a couple of questions about the September ICE raid on Hyundai. I was there, I involved in there, I have a couple of questions. as you know, the more than 400 Hyundai worker was arrested and treated like a criminal, and the media, including AJC, described them like a criminal or illegal and job stealer. But Mr. Kuck and Mr. Diaz know they are safely returned to the South Korea and get into the Georgia again with same visa. And no one was ever criminally charged. So my question is to the journalist is, did you think when your word of choice, like illegal or criminal to the Hyundai worker, contribute betrayal and mistrust within the Korean and Asian community? And do you have any safeguard or process when you report the immigration issue, complex technical immigration issue in Georgia? And my question to the Mr. Kuck and Mr. Diaz is, yes, how can you better translate complex immigration law concept for the media, and how can you better educate media when they cover immigration issue? Everybody know in the room, immigration law violation is just an administrative civil issue. Immigration violation is another felony or misdemeanor. I don't believe the describing immigrant like illegal or criminal is very inappropriate, and so breaking trust within immigrant community. Thank you.
We've seen that word reemerge, illegal, now in newsrooms, and I don't know why. I mean,
Can I pause?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Can I pause you since it was directed at AJC?
Sorry.
So I appreciate your question. I really do. And I have pulled up our story. I can tell you, sir, that our policy is not, as an immigrant myself, I'm very sensitive to this situation. We don't believe that any immigrant is illegal. A human cannot be illegal. So if there's ever an allegation that someone is undocumented, then we attribute that allegation and we use the term undocumented. We ourselves, as the AJC, do not make that judgment. If there's ever the allegation being made, we attribute it to the government agency making that allegation. We certainly do not call anyone a criminal, because that is not our judgment to make, nor do we use that term. So I can see when reading headlines or taking a story as a whole that it might feel that way, but it is not us making that judgment. It is us covering that arrest and attributing that allegation to the government agencies making the judgment of that arrest. So I'm so sorry that that might be the way that it was perceived, but I can assure you that that is not our judgment. That is our reporting based on the facts that are given to us by the folks making those arrests. And so I can tell you in reading this that every quote in this is attributed to the individuals who are speaking to media that were the special agents in charge of making those arrests. So they were making those quotes, and we're obligated to capture the comments that they are making to try to justify those arrests. And in the follow-up stories that we did about those arrests, we did note that they did not appear to have the justification to make those arrests.
Yes, 3 months later. You made this 3 months later.
As the information was made available to us. But I am sorry that that is the perception that reporting was.
You know, this is another example of some of the things that we've seen representing detained individuals where I don't think there was ever any intention to prosecute anybody in this case. The intention of this was just to go detain people, to scare people, and it was done very poorly, like most of the things under this administration are done. So no charges were ever brought. I think almost every single, or not every single person that was picked up in that raid either was here on a visa, or they had lawful authorization to work with an EAD. Every single person in that place.
I think I represented a bunch of them, Koreans. That raid in the plant was actually not a raid of the plant. It was a raid of the construction at the plant, and they intended to pick up 200 Latinos. That's what their number was. They brought handcuffs for 200 Latinos. They brought buses for 200 Latinos. Everybody spoke Spanish. When they walked in with the search warrant to the building, because they had a search warrant to seize computers in the main, everywhere on the site, they saw all these Koreans in there working. And some brilliant officer said, I wonder what these people are doing here. They did months of investigation of this plant and didn't realize there's 400 Koreans getting the plant ready. And what were the Korean workers doing? They were installing the equipment that then the locals could then work there, right? So at 2:30 in the afternoon, after they had processed about 200 people total, they just made a decision. You know what? And I know this is a fact, my source inside. Let's just bring everybody back to the jail and we'll sort it out later. That was literally why they picked people. And then they just made stuff up the next morning in their press conference. One thing you notice immediately in this is that it caught the administration in the lie. You never saw the agent in charge speak again about the Hyundai raid, ever. Ever. They didn't mention it, and it's the only time the president has apologized. That's how bad that was. It was awful. And yes, everybody working there was legally working there, 100%.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I see we have one more question. We're at time, but I don't want to cut that off. So if you don't mind, come on up and we'll just try to do this real quick.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. My question, I heard someone say, well, you know, this too shall pass and it'll move on. And I know I personally have been waiting for the time where the pendulum will swing back in the other direction. But my question is, have you guys put any thought into what we can do moving forward to make sure that the pendulum never swings that far back ever again?
Well, when I'm president, short of that, only Congress could do this. And until we demand of our senators and congressmen of both parties, and both parties are to blame, at least to some extent, nothing will change. I mean, really, the last time we fixed the law was 1990 or 96. That's insane. Every one of our global competitors has updated their immigration laws in the last 3 years. Every single one of them. And they're eating our lunch on global competitiveness. So this is not just about families being ripped apart, but it's also about the future. And yeah, I think the harshness that we're seeing will eventually go away. Now, whether that's in a year or 3 years, it will eventually go away after much damage is done. But I don't think the harm that we're seeing will repair itself for 2 generations. And we will suffer because, as a country, we will suffer because of that. So I would suggest, run for office. You want to change it, run for office and actually do something. We've got big elections coming up here in our state. We should be demanding this. This should be the demand, that they fix it. This issue is so important that we're spending all this time on it, and the media, all this money on it. Why aren't we fixing it? It just seems illogical. That's my 2 cents. But yeah, there's plans.
I will jump in, and I don't necessarily share my colleagues' optimism just yet because I left a country where the pendulum hasn't swung back yet. And what it takes is power, money, and influence. I'm going to take you back to Iran just for 2 seconds, and I know we're not here about Iran, but what's happened in Iran has nothing to do with religion. And I think there's a Western perception that it's about religion and it's not relatable and it's about Islam. It's nothing about that. The regime in Iran owns telecommunications, it owns the banks, it owns the oil, it owns everything. So the powers that be have the power, the money, and influence. And so when we see young people dying as they are right now, when we see doctors dying to save the young people who are protesting right now, and that vicious cycle of the death toll just increasing, and the internet blackout and everything else you've heard about, the reason that that movement is not working is because there is no structure in power and money and influence, right? And I know there's a lot of hopeful statements. The most laughable one was that Trump was going to do something about the thugs that were killing young people, which was laughable because why would you rely on the guy who's sending thugs to kill his own young people? I don't understand that. But until we have people with power and money and influence, and right now, unfortunately, as Nick pointed out, even our social media corporations are everyone from Target, Home Depot, we were talking about this earlier, the very companies that have your data, whether it be your retailers or your social media companies or what have you, they're the ones that are, this is not conspiracy, we know, we report on these things. They are very much handing over the information to support this current situation that we're on this panel talking about. So until that reverses itself, the pendulum will not swing back. So I think it'll take a very long time for this to pass. I think Minneapolis can blow over, right? It might not be politically savvy for that situation to continue, but that's just it. It's like, if that's not going to benefit the politics of the moment, it'll blow over. But the damage that's been done is going to, as Chuck, can I call you Chuck now?
You can call me Chuck.
As Chuck points out, is going to take a substantially long time to reverse the damage.
In the short term, I think creating a record, part of what journalism is a reminder, right, for future generations. So hopefully my daughter and son, they don't have to live through this. And so what I feel like I'm doing right now is creating a record. I work with somebody who's deeply cynical, doesn't think anything will change. Journalists are surrounded usually by pretty cynical people. But I do have hope, and when I look at my kids, that's where I see it. Not to get too cheesy, but I really do think the remedy is recording and making sure that this is documented so people know for future generations what we lived.
That's fair.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Wonderful presentation. This is one where I particularly want to encourage people to look for information in the packet. There are some resources in particular about the rights of journalists to get into the immigration program to cover those hearings. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but there are other details in your packet about what rules apply when attempting to get into an immigration program to cover those proceedings. So that's in your packet. Let's make this a quick turnaround. Be back at 2:30, and we will hear from a panel not Jim, 125. We'll hear from a panel of judges and see you.